In the early days of my 20s, I was employed at our local public library, working night shifts as a secondary job at least 3 times a week, following my first job. I would arrive at 6 and work until the library closed at 9. It was my responsibility to lock up the place after closing. However, I wouldn't simply depart right after the library closed. I had to shut down all the computers, perform some cleaning and organizing, restock the shelves with returned books and DVDs from the day, and take out the garbage before I could leave. On this particular Friday night, as closing time approached, most of the library staff had already left. Only a female librarian and I remained. I made a couple of last-call announcements to the remaining library patrons, informing them that the library would be closing soon. I began cleaning up the place, attempting to finish early so I could leave and start my weekend. The last employee said goodbye to me as soon as the clock struck 9. I announced on the intercom that the library was closed. The 2 remaining guests gathered their belongings and left through the door. Once I was certain that no one else was in the building, I locked the front door. I proceeded to arrange all the chairs neatly under their tables and then started emptying all the garbage cans. When it was time to take them outside to the dumpster on the side, I unlocked the front door again and brought them out. It was quiet outside, as the library was somewhat secluded from any main roads. Upon returning inside, I locked the door again. The only task remaining was to restock all the returned books and DVDs from the day. I grabbed the 2 boxes and started with the DVDs, which was easier since the DVD section was smaller, taking about 5 to 10 minutes. During this time, I thought I heard something coming from one of the book aisles. I started walking through the aisles until I found an open book lying on the floor, which had clearly just fallen off the shelf. I put it back in its place and paused for a moment, wondering how that could have happened. I returned to work, and, after finishing with the DVDs, I took the box of books and started placing them one by one back on the shelves in alphabetical order. Starting with the A's, the books in the box were already sorted in alphabetical order to make the task easier. As I worked my way down the shelves, trying to finish quickly and go home, I heard another noise nearby. 2 unusual sounds in less than 20 minutes could not be a coincidence. I set the box down and started walking through the book aisles again. I found another 2 books on the ground in another aisle. Someone was in the library. I walked out to the open area with all the tables and called out, "Excuse me, the library is closed." There was silence until I heard something from across the library coming from the children's section. As I approached the noises, they began to sound like some rabid animal making growling sounds. I also heard books being thrown onto the floor. The noise was coming from one aisle. I gathered the courage to peek down the aisle and saw a woman wearing a nightgown, throwing random books off the shelf and making disgusting animal-like sounds. I didn't say anything. Instead, I turned and ran to the office where we had a phone, as I did not have a cell phone at this time. I locked the office door and closed the blinds to the window, then called 911. I reported that there was a sickly woman in the library and that they should send an ambulance. When the operator asked if I had approached the woman, I said no, as she looked like she could be dangerous. The operator then asked if the woman was still in the same spot. I opened the blinds and screamed because the woman was right on the other side of the glass, looking in with pupils so large that she appeared demonic. I told the operator that she was right outside the office. The woman began banging on the glass, screaming gibberish. She attempted to open the door, and when it didn't open, she turned around and sat on a chair facing the office. The operator asked me to keep the blind open and watch her. The woman was wobbly as she sat down, so I noted that she was definitely high and out of her mind. 2 police cars and an ambulance arrived at the library. The woman was put in handcuffs because she tried fighting the police officers, but nothing she said made any sense. She was placed in the back of an ambulance and taken away. I never found out what she was on or how she got inside the library. It might have happened while I was taking the garbage out, or perhaps she was inside before I even locked the place. Either way, the incident definitely made being in the library alone after closing quite unsettling from that point on. We moved to a new town when I was 7. Any memories before that move I consider to be part of my very early childhood, and a lot of those memories are blurry at this point. This is one of those memories that happened at some age before 7, perhaps when I was 5 or 6. There was a local town library that our mom would always take my brothers and me to. It was a few blocks away. And I remember this one day when it was just my mom, my little brother, who was a toddler at that point, and me. We started the day at the mall, probably spending hours there, tagging along with our mom while she shopped. Whenever we'd go to this mall, she'd always bring us to the McDonald's inside the mall to get us ice cream cones. I remember we got ice cream on this particular day because, on the way to the library after leaving the mall, I still had some of the cone left in my hand. Upon arriving at the library, there was a kids' computer section that my mom would let me stay at and play computer games while she went and did whatever she needed to do. When I got bored of playing whatever old online computer games were available at the time, I got up and started walking through the aisles of books in the kids' section of the library, looking for the I Spy books. The kids' section was in the far corner of the library, and while I was walking from aisle to aisle, I heard a voice from behind me. I turned around and saw nothing but the back wall of the library, which had another shelf of books leaning on it. Then, I saw half of a grown man's face peer around the shelf, and he said, "Peekaboo." I remember laughing and feeling no sense of danger. He did it again, going back behind the shelf and then peering out his head once more, saying, "Peekaboo" again. I left the aisle, and he asked me what I was looking for. I told him I was searching for the I Spy books, and he offered to help me find them. He came over and took my hand, leading me through the aisles to the section of books that began with the letter I. There, I found at least 5 I Spy books next to each other. I grabbed my favorite one, The Treasure Hunt, and he suggested that we go sit down and play. He led me to a table in the corner by a couple of children's computers, and we started looking through the pictures. This went on for some time, and he was asking me questions about myself as we played I Spy. One question that still sticks out to me the most is, "Who are you here with?" I told him I was there with my mom and little brother. At some point after this, he mentioned that there was a kids' playroom downstairs, which I, at that age, never knew existed. He suggested that we could take the book down there. He led me to the door that led to the basement of the library, which, for reference, is actually where events and meetings for certain clubs and organizations are held. There is a little playroom down there, I guess for parents who have to bring their kids with them during any of the meetings. The man led me to that little playroom where there were various toys, most notably a Lego set and a Lego table, and then there were a bunch of chairs. He set the I Spy book down on the Lego table, and this is where things get really uncomfortable, thinking back on it. He was trying to forcibly get me to play with the toys, and I started to get uncomfortable. Around this time, over the loudspeaker, a female librarian said into the intercom, "Will Liam come to the front, please? Your mother is looking for you." At this time, the man went to turn off the lights in the room, and now it was pitch black inside. He suggested that, in the dark, we were going to play hide and seek. This was the first moment I was genuinely freaked out, and I started to yell for my mom. I remember he kept telling me to be quiet, and his voice was getting louder as he was getting closer to me in the dark. Eventually, he had his hands on me, but thankfully, I managed to run past him and out the door of that room. I ran down the dark hallway back to the stairs, and as I was running up the stairs, I had that same childhood feeling of running up the basement stairs after turning off the lights, only 100 times worse, because I genuinely was scared I was going to be grabbed. I made it back to the main floor of the library and ran straight to the front desk, calling for my mom. She was at the front desk with a group of librarians, and I remember the relief on my mom's face when she saw me. I told her there was some man who took me downstairs, and she literally lost it. The next thing I remember from there was a bunch of police in the building, searching around, but I never saw that man again. He must have exited the building through a different way. I remember speaking to some woman who was probably with the police, asking me very delicate questions. I never really asked my mom about this experience that many times because it's very uncomfortable, and I'd rather just not think of it. In a foreign land, I would undertake 6 courses every semester because I was pursuing a dual degree, and I desired to complete it all in 4 years. This implied that many semesters were filled with an overwhelming amount of homework and studying. My university had a library that remained open until midnight. I was also interning that semester, so I had almost no time to complete my work. I still resided on campus, and my suite mates could be quite loud and distracting at times. This particular incident occurred on a Wednesday night. I had 3 classes that day, along with my internship. I also had 2 exams scheduled for the following day. As soon as I finished my internship, I headed straight to the library. Our campus library was quite large. When I arrived there at 9 p.m., there were still many people around. However, from 9 to 10, the library became much quieter. I planned to stay there until midnight to study for my 2 exams the next day. Around 11, most people had left, but there were still a few remaining. I was seated at one of the tables, positioned between 2 bookshelves on either side, providing a more private and secluded space with fewer distractions. At approximately 11 o'clock, a man who appeared to be in his late 20s entered the section. He passed several empty tables and chose to sit diagonally across from me at my table. I looked up, and he looked back at me, smiling as he set his books down. I looked back down and attempted to concentrate on my studying, trying not to wonder too much about why he decided to sit at my table. As I was reviewing the slides on my laptop, the man at my table said, "Excuse me," and asked if I happened to be taking a specific economics course. I politely responded with a, "No, sorry," hoping that would be the end of the conversation. However, he proceeded to explain why he asked, mentioning that his professor gives pop quizzes every day. I expressed my sympathy, then tried to return to my studying. At this point, my focus was no longer entirely on the material. Instead, I was distracted by the presence of this man, whom I suspected would continue trying to engage me in conversation. I looked up from my laptop screen and saw the man looking at me, smiling slightly. I contemplated whether to get up and move elsewhere or simply leave. He then asked for my name. I made up a name and said, "Chelsea." He commented, "You have such blue eyes, Chelsea." This led me to question whether this man was truly there to study or to make unwanted advances towards women. The fact that he appeared to be nearly 30 years old did not help alleviate my concerns. I asked him the name of his economics professor. He hesitated before responding, "Professor Davis." When I inquired about the professor's first name, he shook his head, indicating that he did not know. I immediately visited ratemyprofessor.com and searched for any professors with the last name Davis at our school. Only one result appeared, a calculus professor whose last reviews were left years ago. I decided to approach the security worker at the front door for assistance. As I stood up, I felt the man's gaze following me as I walked over to the security worker and explained that this man was making me uncomfortable, and that I did not believe he was a student. The security worker accompanied me back to the table and asked to see the man's student ID. The man began searching through his wallet and pockets, then claimed that he must have left it in his dorm. The security worker then asked which dorm building he resided in. The man was clearly lying, as he struggled to respond and eventually admitted that he could not remember the name of the dorm. The security worker escorted the man out of the library and advised me to be cautious while walking back to my dorm. I thanked him. For the remainder of my time in the library, my thoughts were consumed by the creepiness of that man. I did my best to continue studying, and around midnight, I knew it was time to wrap up so I could get some sleep. I packed my belongings and left through the same exit the security guard had escorted the man. He was not standing there at that moment. I do not know where he went. I began walking through the virtually deserted campus. No one typically walks around that late on a Monday to Wednesday night. However, as I neared my dorm building, I heard at least one loud footstep behind me. I turned around but saw no one. I was certain I had heard a footstep though. I started running, which may have been a mistake, as the second I began running, made more difficult by my backpack. I heard running footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the man from the library sprinting towards me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but only for a second before I was tackled to the ground and had a hand cover my mouth. He kept threatening me, saying, "You better shut up or I'll kill you." I genuinely believed my life was about to end. I continued trying to call for help, but my cries were muffled by his hand. He then stood up and began dragging me by the throat, out of sight of the main walkways. I saw that he was dragging me towards the woods near the dorms. I managed to remove his hand from my mouth for just long enough to scream again. It was enough to attract the attention of 2 men who came running over, yelling at my attacker to stop. The man released me and started running towards the woods. The 2 men came over to me, and although I am sure they were asking if I was okay and other concerned questions, I blocked out all noise for a few moments. I was in total shock and began crying uncontrollably. The 2 men called the university police, and I did my best to compose myself and explain the situation. We went to the library to ask the security worker for his description of the man, which matched my description. The police were also able to use footage from the library cameras to obtain a clear image of the man's face. The picture was distributed to all students' phones and emails, as well as the school's website. That same night, an anonymous tip revealed that the man was at a late-night dive bar down the road from the school. The police arrived at the bar and arrested him. The level of trauma this incident induced in me was immense. I cannot even begin to imagine the trauma experienced by those who were not as fortunate as I was in similar situations.